Hi everyone, it's Laura here for Studio Katia, and in today's video I'm going to share with you 3 different color combinations for your distress ink rainbows, as well as 6 card examples you can create with those backgrounds. I started by doing some die cutting and I created 3 different panels for each of my distress ink rainbows. This is some watercolor cardstock by Spectrum Noir, and the die that I used is the rectangular die in the Darling Ribbon and Dotted Frames dies. Let's start with our first rainbow, and in this case I went for a very bright color combination. The distress inks colors that I used are Wilted Violet, Picked Raspberry, Salty Ocean, Mowed Lawn, Mustard Seed and Spiced Marmalade. This is not, however, the order in which I will ink blend my distress inks, because when I got to the Picked Raspberry, I realized that the next color in rainbow order was not Salty Ocean, but Spiced Marmalade, so I will modify the order, and you will find everything in the blog post that is linked in the description box down below, so you can check that out for reference. I'm using my blending tools to ink blend my inks. I'm always trying to start from the edges of the panel and move my way inwards using circular motions with my hand. And to create a little bit of extra interest on the panels, I am adding my inks at an angle, so my distress ink rainbow will not be parallel to the panel, but as I said, will be slightly inclined. I kept blending my inks, so after Spiced Marmalade I have Mustard Seed, Mowed Lawn and then Salty Ocean. As I said, this was supposed to be a very bright rainbow color combination, and this is what basically drove the choice of my distress inks. Here is the final result, and then we can move on and create our second rainbow background, this time with a pastel palette. We have Shaded Lilac, Spun Sugar, Dried Marigold, Squeezed Lemonade, Twisted Citron and Tumbled Glass. Also in this case I'm going to create my rainbow at an angle, and I'm going to follow the same order that I used for the first rainbow background. The reason is that in the end I will show you the 3 backgrounds and you will be able to compare them more easily because the order in the colors is the same. So I started with Shaded Lilac, I moved on to Spun Sugar, next in line is Dried Marigold, and whenever there is a transition between colors, I'm going back and forth with my foams and the 2 colors to create a nice gradient between the 2. For my yellows, as I said, I'm using Squeezed Lemonade, and then for the greens I have Twisted Citron, and for my blue I have Tumbled Glass. If you're working on a glass mat or on a slick surface, it is important to clean it between applications, because this way you will not pick up whatever color is left on your surface with the one you're currently blending, and you will avoid contaminations. And here is how our pastel rainbow background looks once it's all blended. For my third and last background, I wanted a bit of a muted color palette, so I picked out Dusty Concord, Victorian Velvet, Rusty Hinge, Fossilized Amber, Crushed Olive and Stormy Sky. This is a very unusual palette for me when it comes to creating rainbows with distress inks, but it was really fun to experiment and to try new color combinations. Actually, none of the distress ink backgrounds that I showed you today is my go-to rainbow color combination. So, as I said, it was really fun to experiment and to try new palettes with my distress inks. These are just 3 examples of what you can create with your distress inks, but obviously there are even more possibilities for you, so make sure to play around with your colors and do let me know in the comments down below which is your go-to distress ink rainbow color combination. I'm really curious about that. The cardstock that I'm using is Watercolour cardstock by Spectrum Noir, which I really like for ink blending because it's bright white, so this is something that I personally like a lot. I'm not going for a perfect blend here because I will be adding splatters, but if you wanted a really smooth gradient, then Bristol Smooth cardstock is also a great choice. Here is a quick look at the third and last Distress Ink rainbow background, and here you can see them side by side. We have the vintage on the left, the pastel in the center and the bright one on the right. And then to create a little bit of extra interest, I decided to spritz some water from a distress sprayer. The water will reactivate the inks, and then I can pick it up with a clean paper towel to reveal these fun droplets. You can go ahead and keep adding droplets until you get the results that you like. In this case, I'm going to add a few more to the vintage background because I wanted to break it up a little bit more, and then I moved on and started doing some die cutting because we're going to use these 3 backgrounds to create 6 different cards. I used 3 different dies on the 3 different backgrounds to create a little bit of variation in the designs that I'm showing you today, but obviously you can use 1 die and create the same design out of the 3 backgrounds, and your cards will be super pretty anyway. I used the Studio Katia Fancy Scalloped Circles dies to die cut the vintage rainbow background. For my bright rainbow, I used the Dotted Balloons dies. And lastly, for my rainbow background, I used the Fancy Scalloped Hearts dies. These are all by Studio Katia. I ran everything through my die cutting machine, and then I'm going to repeat basically the same process, but using instead some white cardstock. This way I can swap around the background and these focal points between my white cardstock and the rainbows, and I can create 6 different designs. So here is my white cardstock. I die cut it first with the same rectangle die from the Darling Ribbon and Frames dies that I used on my watercolor ink blended panels. And then in order to have the same exact design on the white cardstock so that I can create an inlay die cutting effect, what I'm doing is I am overlapping the white and ink blended rectangles. I am making sure that they are lined up as precisely as I can, and then I'm going to use the opening in the ink blended rectangle to position the die and secure it in place on the white panel. I'm going to very carefully slide off the ink blended background, and then I can run everything through my die cutting machine, and I'm left with basically the same 2 panels that I have with my Distress Ink rainbow, this time, as I said, out of white cardstock. And now what I can do is to swap the position of the hearts so that I can create a white card base with a rainbow die cut heart and a rainbow card base with a white die cut heart. Off camera, I repeated the same steps with the other backgrounds, so using that scalloped circle as well as the balloon die, and then I'm going to adhere everything to some card bases. These are some pre-cut and pre-scored A2 card bases that I had in my stash, which made the card making process even faster. I'm going for some simple designs for these cards, but obviously you can always add more details and have fun with your designs. I just wanted to show you the basic concepts with these Distress Ink backgrounds and how to maximize them and make multiple cards out of them. Here you can see my backgrounds for the bright, the pastel and the grungy rainbow backgrounds, and then the next step is to work on some images. I went through my stash and I tried to pick stamp sets that would somehow match with the backgrounds that I had. I felt that the cactus hugs would be perfect for my vintage rainbows. The KOBI'S Hugs and Kisses will be very nice with my pastel rainbow backgrounds, so I'm going to use it for those cards. And then the last stamp set that I'll be using is the adorable honeybees. I've been using this quite a lot and I'm going to pair it with my bright backgrounds. I find coloring with alcohol markers the quickest for me, so this is the medium that I chose for today. I was creating multiple cards, so I tried to keep the process as fast and as efficient as possible. So I'm stamping all the images on some Nina Solar White 110 pounds cardstock using Spectrum Noir alcohol-proof black ink. Here are the stamped images. I'm also going to stamp another set of KOBI with the flowers for my 2 pastel rainbow cards, and then I can start doing my coloring. I'm not going to show you the entire coloring process because I used the same color combinations for all the cacti, for all the bees, and also the two images of Kobe and the flowers were colored in the same exact way, but I wanted to show you at least one cactus, one bee, and Kobe and the flowers once, so that you can see which markers I used and my technique. The coloring that I'm doing is pretty simple this time around, again with the idea of keeping the card making process as fast as possible because we're creating so many cards today, and I am generally starting with my darkest marker. I'm then blending it out towards the highlights with the mid-tone, and then I'm using an even lighter marker to create my highlights. And I'm not worrying too much about light sources and things like that. I'm just adding a little bit of shading to create depth and interest in my images. Because I'm adding the image of Kobe to the pastel rainbow background, I wanted to have some very soft colors on my images as well. I used some very light cool gray markers to add a little bit of shading to the body of Kobe. I used IG1 and IG3, and I'm leaving most of the body white because, as I said, I don't want dark images for this card. I also used a colorless blender to blend those grays towards the white areas, and then I used some skin tones for the muzzle and the cheeks. Again, keeping everything very light and airy to match nicely with that pastel rainbow background. For the flowers, I used some pinks, some teal blues, and some lilacs. And I did want to mention the fact that yes, I did use 3 different dyes for my backgrounds and 3 different stamp sets, but this was just to show you more options and to give you more ideas. You can totally create your 6 card bases using 1 die to cut the focal panels and the same stamp set, and you will still get some really pretty cards which will all be a little bit different from each other. Once I was done coloring the images, I die cut them all with the coordinating dies. The KOBI'S Hugs and Kisses die also cut the paws so that I could tuck the flowers in. I created a banner out of some craft cardstock that I will use to ground my cacti, and then I used dies from the lovely Words dies to create some die cut sentiments. And then for the cards where I have the bees, I also hit embossed the greetings in the Honey Bees stamp set on some black cardstock, and I die cut that with the coordinating dies to the PEONY Trimmings stamp set. Before adhering everything together and completing my designs, I decided that I wanted to break up these backgrounds a little bit more because they are so bold and they occupy such a large fraction of my card front, so I felt like I needed a little bit more white going on there. What I did is I diluted some acrylic paint with some water, and then I created splatters all over the backgrounds using a thin brush. I put the backgrounds aside to dry for a couple of minutes, and in the meantime I added a little bit of shading with Rusty Hinge to these craft cardstock banners. The reason why I chose Rusty Hinge is that these banners will go on the vintage rainbow background, and there Rusty Hinge was one of the colors that I used to create the rainbow, so there is some color coordination between the elements on the card. At this point everything was ready, and all that was left to do was to adhere my sentiments and my images in place. I'm going to have pretty much the same designs on each card, so the position of the images and the sentiments will be the same for each set of cards. You can see here how I am using that banner to ground the cacti and how I am adhering the cacti at different heights on the banner to create the illusion of perspective and a little bit of depth in the card. I also overlapped the hugs die cut to the banner, and I created the second card in that set in the same exact way. The cards with the bees are the only ones where the position of the elements is a little bit different between the two cards, and this is because I just wanted to fill the space, the available space, in a different way. I'm going to show you all the cards in a minute, but before that I decided to add a few highlights with a white gel pen. And here are all the cards that I created. I will show them to you in sets. As I said already, you can totally take these designs a step further and add embellishments or shimmer, whatever you like, but I wanted to keep them nice and clean and fast to create. Make sure to let me know in the comment section down below which set of cards or which card is your favorite. I do love how each and every one of them turned out, but if I had to pick a favorite, I think it will have to be one of the cards with the cacti. And that's it for today. If you guys enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up and leave a comment in the comment section down below. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe for more card making and paper crafting inspiration. Thank you all so much for stopping by and have a great day.